Innanzitutto desidero.
So, first of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Rutte here as chair of the delegation for NATO relations. The idea that citizens have, and our perception as well, is that the European architecture for security is getting weak, if not even falling apart. The European continent is in a complex situation of military and non-military threats after the Russian war against the Ukraine. In the West, though, the American commitment seems to have waned towards Europe. Now, in this period of geopolitical transformations, we need to have a European architecture for security that is strengthened and renewed in the transatlantic relations. So when we speak of the EU and NATO, we need to promote stability in the European neighborhood, in the Middle East. I also want to underline how important the parliamentary dimension is in this alliance, because NATO is not only a military instrument, but also a democratic instrument at an international level. And I have a few questions. So first of all, how can we avoid that our political differences and that the elections endanger the unity of the alliance and avoid that it poses a threat to our security? Now, on Greenland, I would like to congratulate you for your contribution in order to diffuse tensions in the alliance. But could you explain and provide more details of what you said in Davos when you spoke of a framework for security in the Arctic? What will NATO be doing in the north? And is there a partnership that's foreseen in this region? The security of the Arctic is a security prerequisite. It's necessary. And have we offered enough guarantees to Trump? I would like to remind you that the countries in NATO don't all have the same capacity. They don't always have the necessary systems to intervene, if we speak of icebreakers, for example. So I think we need to change our capability targets as well. Do you think that's necessary? And then on Ukraine, there are worrying international developments. I'm speaking of Greenland, India, Venezuela, and that seems to have distracted our attention from Ukraine and Russia. There are investments that are planned, but we also have a lesser commitment from the U.S. Do you think that alone we will be able to support Ukraine? And will Ukraine reach a peace agreement? And then, with NATO, what instruments do we need now in order to react to this geopolitical situation, which is evolving continually? Thank you for your attention, for your time.
Thank you, Salvatore. Now I hand over the chair to AFET for conducting the Q&A answers with members, starting with the coordinators, following by Catch the Eye. David, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, colleagues. We have exactly 55 minutes because the Secretary General has to leave this meeting. So we're trying to square the circle. I will give the floor to many members as possible, but we begin with the coordinators of SEDE and AFET. And once again, the maximum speaking time is 2 minutes, and 2 minutes is 120 seconds. We cannot discuss this. And if you speak less than 120 seconds, you have a unique opportunity to raise your popularity among other colleagues. I'll leave it there, and the first speaker for maximum 120 seconds is Nicolas Pasquale de la Parte, EPP SEDE.
Thank you very much, David. I will be shorter. I will be very popular. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for being with us for the second time in a very short time. I want to focus my question in a very, very important one, I think, Ukraine. The security guarantees that we are ready to offer the Ukrainian friends. You know that Putin has made crystal clear, adamant, that he will consider any deployment of contingents of troops in Ukraine from NATO countries, European countries, as legitimate military targets in the future. Then, if we take this into account, how can we square the circle? How can we deploy troops in order to make sure that the guarantees, the security guarantees for the Ukrainians are there to avoid any militarism, adventurism in the future from Russia, and at the same time to take into account also the threat that we will be considered military targets? I would like to know your take on this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. For AFET EPP, I give the floor to our colleague Sebastião Bugalho.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Secretary General, welcome to the European Parliament. Coming from one of the founding members of NATO, it's always good to have you here with us. And looking at your past year, we can apply a very Portuguese saying to your role. When you want a miracle, you go to Fatima. When we want a miracle, we go to NATO. So 3 brief questions. The US is currently planning to strengthen their presence in Greenland in a bilateral spirit. At the same time, NATO is doing the same between ourselves. Does this set a precedent within the alliance? Will the US be exempt from the future NATO presence in the island, and can that mean a future NATO and 2 speeds or not? And your thoughts about it. Second, to your knowledge, did the US administration put the security guarantees to Ukraine recently agreed in Paris on the table during the Greenland talks as leverage? Yes or no? And third, the EU Commission recently announced a new strategy for the Arctic. Would you command a new strategy for the Atlantic in cooperation with the alliance in order to contain the Russian shadow fleet, the sabotage of sea cables, and organized crime? Thank you. 1 minute, Chair. The second question is, Mr. Secretary, thank you. To your knowledge, did the US administration put the security guarantees to Ukraine, recently agreed in Paris, on the table during the Greenland talks as leverage? Yes or no? Thank you.
Right, next is from the City Committee, the SND's Thijs Rutte. I'm happy to give a Dutch compatriot of yours the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Rutte, for starting off with Ukraine, because we were terribly distracted in the past 2 weeks from our main task. And you brought up the loan and the conditions. What can we do? But also what are you doing right after this meeting in terms of calling member states to call for them not only for flexibility on the loan, but also on the much needed air defense and other weapons that Ukraine needs today, not in a couple of weeks. But the distraction was not caused by Europe. The distraction was caused by threats against Europe. Under which circumstances should we take threats against our territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence seriously? Because we need guarantees that this will never happen again, or should we, in your view, always ignore them? My second point relates to your remarks on Afghanistan. Very good that you pointed out the huge sacrifices by other NATO allies in Afghanistan, but regrettably, there's no formal excuse yet. I think that NATO, together, all the allies, and maybe you can play a role in that, should go back on this point, because it's well, disgraceful, I think, the way that the President of the United States has talked about the efforts of allies. Last point, what is NATO's perspective on Article 42.7 and strengthening our autonomy and diminished dependence, and also on defining better the European pillar of NATO? We have published the CSDP report. It was approved last week. We think that we need to work on that together with NATO to give more body to this European pillar of NATO within NATO, but also to work more independently from NATO if necessary.
Thank you, Thijs. Next is Nacho Sanchez-Amor, please.
Tantas cosas de las que lidiar.
Well, so much I could say. So much we could say. You've mentioned some of the points we have to deal with, but we seem to be distracted, as Thijs said, by the personal approach, the personal attitude of the Secretary General of NATO. Now, you said you wanted to, you talked to the ambassador to NATO. Are you the ambassador, or are you the Secretary General representing the organization and its members? Now, some people believe that the only possible way to deal with the Trump administration is appeasement. Now, if this is the case, your attitude is hard to understand. Now, take the private text messages. They were private text messages. But I really think you should reassess the relationship of trust that you have with somebody who publishes your private text messages. And I would also like to mention what you said recently, that European defense is impossible without the US. You didn't add something which many Europeans would like to hear. Defense is not possible today without the US, but our goal is to ensure fully autonomous defense of the EU. Now, I believe there is a middle path, And I think many Europeans would wish you to find that.
Thank you, Nacho. Next, for the Patriots in SEDE, I give the floor to our colleague, Monsieur Thionnet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I'll be speaking French. Mr. Secretary General, Charles Péguy, a major French writer, wrote the following. He says, you should always say what you see. And what is even more difficult, you should always see what you see. End of quote. Now, it would seem that over the past few months, your role has been to say the contrary to what everyone seems to be seeing. Now, in spite of that blindness, we see that you're trying to keep up appearances, because reality is without ambiguity. NATO faces a structural crisis because its major supporter no longer sees it as necessary, which is the US. And the Defense Security published this a few days ago. Now, it's a local problem for the Europeans, what is happening in Ukraine because of Russia. And Moldova has no importance. If you look at the Panama Canal, Ukraine is not as important as Greenland for them. So much so that over the past few weeks, there's been a lot more pressure from the US on Copenhagen than there was on Moscow. We need to speak plainly. If the US is going to become active, it's not to strengthen NATO, but actually to shirk away from its commitments under NATO. And the security of Europeans can be under threat without the US security being under threat. And this is a major rupture. Is this the death of NATO? Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's certainly not desirable. But my question to everyone is, isn't it high time, in addition to NATO, to set up an alliance which would bring together all of the European countries, including the UK? Now, this weekend, you've already stated that the EU cannot defend itself. Now, this is true to your pessimism. It's true that there are certain capabilities missing, but on the other side of the Atlantic, there's something even more important missing. There is no longer the willingness to defend Europe. So, Mr. Secretary General, you don't say this, but I hope you see it, because it's still more important not to see what you see. Thank you.
Next for the Patriots in AFET is Josh Hoveni.
Thank you, David. Thank you, dear Secretary General, for your presence. This is really as white here. And to be really short, very short, yeah. It's a delicate issue, of course. Everything is delicate. While the initiative of the Board of Peace may appear unconventional or difficult to understand at first, it could be offered alternative and initiative approach to bringing wars to the end. For example, the full application and what's happened on the 7th October 2023 and after Gaza are still difficult to assess. In my view, it goes absolutely behind the tragedy. And we have seen how years before President Trump initiated the Abraham Accords, which normalized the relation between Israel and several other countries. And we are now once again a similar moment, maybe, with the creation of the Board of the Peace. Question, it's really clear. How do you see, in person if it's possible, but it's a small provocation only, as the Secretary General, the view this new Board Peace initiative? And what potential connection does NATO, direct or indirect, see between the Board of Peace and the Alliance? How can the NATO support peace process while avoiding further escalation? This is very important. Many thanks.
Thank you, Josh. For the ECR in SEDE, Reinis Posnax is the first.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Mr. Rutte, for being with us, for your time. Basically, all the main topics are already covered by my colleagues, so I need to be creative, to find a new, more questions. But yeah, so mostly people are worried about Article 5 in the NATO treaty, but there is also Article 2 in this treaty, which says that members of NATO will eliminate conflicts in their internal economic policies and will encourage economic collaboration between all of them. So, and in that perspective, I would like to ask As you know, not so long time ago, Germany and Italy made a bilateral agreement to strengthen like European pillar of NATO. And what do you think? Is it the good example for other countries to make more bilateral or trilateral alliances inside the NATO? Thank you.
Thank you. The AFET coordinator of ECR, Adam Bielan, is not present, so I'll give the floor to Sebastian Tinkinen, who's the first speaker on the ECR list. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I will provide a new angle. For Iranians, dear Secretary General Mark Rutte, for Iranians, the Islamic regime of Iran is their primary threat. On the other hand, NATO exists to confront two primary threats, Russia and terrorism. In Iran, we see both these threats converge. The IRGC is a terrorist organization that provides military support to Russia in Ukraine, destabilizes entire regions, and causes mass civilian suffering, which is taking place at this very moment. This means that Iran is directly contributing to the security challenges NATO faces. The Iranians are now calling for the West to act. They ask for help to tear down this regime that poses a threat to all of us. Mr. Secretary General, I call you to organize a coalition of the willing from NATO countries to execute an operation in Iran that would target the leadership of the regime. Thank you.
Now it's time for the two Renew speakers. We kick off with Nathalie Loiseau for CEDE.
Merci, je vais parler en français.
Thank you. I'll speak French. Secretary General, you have a very difficult task before you. Last week, you had to defuse a crisis within the alliance, and we are very thankful for these efforts. But this is an existential threat that we have, and that's what I want to talk about. The threat that Putin is to European security. Now, we've read the European defense strategy, and we have to admit that Washington doesn't consider the Russian threat as a priority. So what are you doing concretely in order to strengthen the European pillar of NATO, to make sure that it can face the Russian threat, even if we had to do it without the US and without their help? Now, you've said that Europe can't protect itself alone, but what are you doing concretely so that what's true today is not true tomorrow? Thank you.
Next for the Greens in CEDE. Hilde Woutmans, I'm sorry.
Dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter, meneer de secretaris-generaal.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear Secretary General, dear Mark, it's great to see you here again. Now, last week in Strasbourg, we kept very close tabs on you, and congratulations on how you managed the crisis, and thank you. But, you know, here we're in-house, so I'd like to ask you, what did you promise Mr. Trump specifically in relation to Greenland, which isn't going to encroach on European sovereignty? We're really interested to know how you managed to stave off that crisis. Now, then, extra troops are being sent. What are their tasks going to be? What is the competence? I mean, they're stuck between the US and the EU. So what will they be doing there? The second part of my question is on the European pillar within NATO, which is what my colleague Mrs. Loiseau was driving at. Now, we set great store by what you do. Mr. Rutte, you have a very good relationship with Trump, but you're Dutch, you're a liberal, you're one of us. Now, you should never forsake your origins, I've always been told. So, in The Hague, you said 5% at the summit. Well, if we spend the 5% as we did in the past with European countries, then you'll have many national strategies and you'll be reforming NATO into a purchasing center for the US. And this can't be our intention. If we want to strengthen NATO, we need a strong European pillar and we need to move from cooperation towards integration. How are you going to make sure that this purchasing is done jointly? We're only at 18% currently. 18% of European purchases are done together, are done jointly, only 18%. And usually we buy from the US when in fact we should be buying within the EU. So the road to Ankara, because that's where it's going to happen, the road to Ankara needs to be paved with concrete steps so that we can use NATO's command and control structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Hilde. And now for the Greens, Martin Stakis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary General, for being here. And my question will be about recent events in Davos. So after Davos, the US President, Donald Trump, claimed that the US and NATO has agreed on a framework for a deal. And since then, the signals have been mixed. While the US administration says it's getting everything it wants, senior NATO officials, including the Supreme Allied Commander, as well as authorities in Denmark and in Greenland, say that they have no details about this. Yet without Greenland and Denmark, no deal is possible. So my question is this. Is there in effect a deal that would fundamentally change the existing arrangements between US, Denmark and Greenland? Or is the talk of the framework for a deal mainly an attempt by the Trump administration to save face as it backtracks from early threats? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The AFET rapporteur, the AFET spokesperson for the Greens, Hannah Neumann, is not here, so I will give the floor to Willy Schöndal so we can hear a voice from Denmark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I am a Danish MEP, whereas I would be very interested to hear your account of the negotiation deal with President Trump last week about Greenland. I'm also a former Danish foreign minister at a time where it was easy to deal with the US. It was during the Obama-Hillary Clinton period. So we shared values. We shared the views on strong international organizations. We shared almost on every path which way to move forward. Today it's opposite. So therefore I would ask, what supposed deal did you make with the American President Trump? This has not been especially clear because Trump has one way of dealing with the meeting. I guess you have another. What is your approach to what's happened? Does said agreement infringe on the red lines put forward by Denmark and Greenland that we're not going to give any square meter to any country because of threats? Do you have a mandate as a Secretary General to negotiate on behalf of Greenland and Denmark on these matters? And how would you, within the NATO framework, strengthen the defense of Greenland? Because what was really strange was that Trump said that Greenland was not defended well enough. Then a lot of European countries said, well, we will help. Then the man got very angry. That's strange if the point was that it was not defended well enough. And as a last question, no? Okay.
Thank you, Willy. For the left in Sede, I give the floor to Özlem Demirel, who's just behind the camera.
Ja, danke schön, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I'll be speaking German. Thank you, Mr. Rutte. Thank you for your opening remarks. You are the Secretary General of the largest military union in the world. And if I put it politely, then I might say that the very notion of this military union and its invention in the past is somewhat questionable. But you have made a name for yourself, namely with your relationship with Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump has published your private text messages on social media, and I was very surprised by your tone when you read, Dear President, Dear Donald, what you achieved today in Syria was unbelievable. I will use my press conference in Davos to talk about what you've done in Gaza and Ukraine. Now, In the light of these words, I can only say what Trump has done in Syria and in Gaza is indeed unbelievable, but not in a positive sense. It's not what he has done is not something that should be praised. Mr. Trump should not be praised for the massacres which are taking place there. Now, I'm talking about Greenland. I was wondering what your approach was as European MEP, which you are not. Now, you said Mr. Trump announced that he wants a closer alliance. Now, I would like to know what nature does this agreement take? What is contained in the agreement? And to what extent has this agreement encroached on the sovereignty of the Greenlanders? Because the question is, to what extent will this has this agreement done this, and to what extent have you made commitments which the Denmark is not aware of, where the Greenland will be treated as third-status citizens? I really don't think you had the right to infringe on the sovereignty of a country like this.
Nächster Redner ist für die Linke.
Next speaker for the left, Afid Danilo Della Valle.
Thank you. I will speak Italian. In questi anni
Over the last few years, they've always repeated that NATO guaranteed peace and security to European and non-European citizens, besides the bombing in Serbia and Libya. But in general, NATO expansion to the east and the submissiveness to American interests have brought the war on the European borders as well. And this has led to the division of the Ukraine and a total dependency on the U.S. And you have asked the Europeans to prepare for a situation like the ones our grandparents lived through. That means to prepare for a war. And now there is a risk here because of Greenland, because whatever the agreement you reach, whatever the euphoria, Trump says he'll do what he wants with the island. So I would like to know, will you continue with this strategy of expansionism and submissiveness to the U.S.? 6 months you said that Ukraine in NATO is inevitable, but today it seems to be a red line in the peace negotiations. So do you still think this is the right path and what will actually happen?
Als nächstes hat für die ESN-Fraktion das Wort.
Next for ESN, Mr. Neuhoff, please.
Ich werde Deutsch sprechen.
I'll be speaking German.
Herr Generalsekretär,
Mr. Secretary General, the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, in his address at the World Economic Forum in Davos, accused or criticized strongly the European countries, and he also openly stated that Tomahawk weapons, long-distance weapons, is something that is no longer being discussed, even though they know the coordinates of Russian arms factories. Now, President Metzeler, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, and Chancellor Merz in 2024 called for Taurus missiles to be made available to Ukraine. Now, my question is, do you share the view as Secretary General, in view of the speech from Mr. Zelensky, that the supply of these weapons is in keeping with NATO's ambitions, which is to avoid a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia? And a follow-on question is, can you, Mr. Secretary General, assure the citizens of the EU unequivocally that NATO will not politically or militarily become involved directly in the war for as long as there is no Russian attack on NATO territory? Thank you.
The ESN spokesperson AFET is Stanislav Stoyanov. I don't see him, so I'm asking somebody from the ESN group. Bitte sehr, Herr Kollege, dann können Sie sprechen.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rutte, for joining us here today. And I really don't envy your job. It's a tricky one. Now, I was happy to hear that you said you were taking a realistic approach to the international order, and this morning I looked at the US defense strategy, and I found a sentence in there which I will quote. Earlier governments have used the resources available to defend the American people and to the detriment and global international citizens to the detriment of US citizens. Now, it's somewhat interesting to hear this when we've talked about a rule-based international order. We heard this last week in the in Strasbourg plenary, and when Chuck Zimmerman has always criticized the American government for their approach in Venezuela, but it seems that we have a partner here where we talk a lot about international order, but in Europe we seem unwilling to actually step up and defend this rule-based international order, but in the US are actually doing something. They're making use of the instruments they have available to defend their international order. Is this not a difference of values between NATO partners? On the one hand, we talk a lot in Europe, it's a talking shop. On the other hand, in the US, they are actually acting on their words. Now, how can these, the values which underlie NATO, how can they be supported when here in Europe we are harshly criticizing the US for their realistic approach to the international order?
Thank you. All coordinators in both AFET and SEDA have now spoken. I will now start with the catch the eye procedure. Just for the timing, the Secretary General has to leave the room at 4:45. We want to give him at least 15 minutes to respond. That now leaves us with 8 minutes. I will go according to the D'Hondt list, and at 5:30 I will close. Then we have a very transparent procedure. The first is for 1 minute, and that is 60 seconds. The EPP's Michael Scherber.
Good afternoon, Secretary General. It's a pleasure to have you here. And two questions. First questions will be on military mobility and Schengen. Military Schengen. Russia's war against Ukraine has drawn renewed attention to military mobility and the urgent need to facilitate the rapid cross-border movement of troops, equipment and assets across Europe. What is the importance of this work we are also doing and I'm going to do on this legislative package soon in the context of a NATO task? So this is the first question. The second will be on what you already mentioned, Secretary General. This is EU security and defense partnerships. And of course, I love your comments on Australia, New Zealand and other democratic partners, like-minded partners. We want to have new partnerships. Also, we need these partnerships to strengthen EU-NATO cooperation. And the last thing, do you see any new forms of dialogue between us which will be useful for both the EU and NATO? Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is the SND's Tonino Pizzula.
Thank you, David. Secretary General, thank you for coming. Russia interferes not only in the EU member states but also in our immediate neighborhood, namely Western Balkans. Domestic actors in the region, particularly those under pressure, are prone to excesses aimed at undermining stability. That's my questions concerning that region. How do you assess the overall security state of play in the Western Balkans, especially when it's affected from the non-EU and the non-NATO countries? What do you see as the biggest threat to security and stability there? And how do you assess the impact of geopolitical changes on the region? And how do you see the role of the NATO in the region in the coming years? Thank you.
Thank you, Tonino. Next is the EPP's Wouter Beke.
Dank u wel, secretaris-generaal, om hier te zijn.
Thank you, Secretary General, for being in attendance, and it's nice to be able to speak Dutch to each other. I just have a very short question. You'll understand, I'm sure, that our trust has been tested by the US and that in this meeting we have a great deal of mistrust when it comes to the application of Article 5. I'm not going to ask you to dispel those worries, but the Berlin Plus agreements, do they still apply? And what does that mean specifically? Can the EU count on NATO intelligence, on NATO's communication systems, even if they're to a large extent supervised by the US, if the EU were to ask for an application of the Berlin Plus agreements?
The next speaker is for Renew, colleague Ostrevicius.
Thank you, Chair. Will you, Secretary General of NATO, be the one under whose leadership this great organization as North Atlantic organization be enlarging further on? How much it is on your list of priority to see our, exactly, enlarging. Secondly, you spoke elegantly about NATO standard, but these standards are changing. And I think for the time of being, we should speak about Ukraine's standard. And we'll learn, and we have to learn from this standard as soon as possible, as long as there is a possibility and time. So how much NATO capacity is, getting better and more effective learning from Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the SND's colleague Maniatis.
Thank you. Dear Secretary General, last week in Davos, the Canadian Prime Minister here, Mark Carney, spoke about the rupture in the world order and the beginning of a brutal reality where geopolitics among the great powers is not subject to any constraints. In this new reality, which is the role of NATO and why allies should still have confidence in NATO that it will respect international law and protect them if and when needed? I am talking about Article 5, when at the same time the US President is openly questioning the sovereignty of an ally.
Thank you. Next is the PFE's colleague Pokorna. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, thank you for the floor. I will continue Czech. Já možná na rozdíl od...
Unlike some of my colleagues, I am convinced that NATO remains to be the main pillar of our collective security. It is necessary for protecting the Arctic, including Greenland, and to ensure the end of the Russian war against the Ukraine. I have three questions. What changes in NATO approach would you recommend in order to prevent further escalation of the war in the future? What structural changes within NATO are required in order to maintain this changed approach, including the capabilities of European defense industry and small companies in order to support this approach? And what is your view on the repeated calls for creating a European army with a unified central command next to or in addition to NATO?
Is Mr. Sousa Silva, EPP.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in Portuguese. Senhor Secretary-Geral.
Secretary General, against a backdrop of a growing geopolitical competition in the North Atlantic and increasing NATO presence on the eastern border and increasing threats, how do you assess within NATO the strategic importance of the Azores, especially the NATO base and the Portuguese base on Ilha Terceira, for both our collective security, but also in the way of ensuring stability across the Atlantic and stability between Europe and North America? Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ingeborg Terlaak.
Dank u wel. En ik zit hier...
Thank you. I'm over here. Well, it's very nice to have you in attendance again. I've heard a lot of questions from my colleagues, and I think we are all imbued with the impression that the world order has shifted, and we are all together looking at how we can organize matters afresh. How are we going to cooperate in future? And you started your address by mentioning Ukraine. I think that's really important in terms of security for the EU. That's the main challenge. You also mentioned the 19 billion euro in loan, but Ukraine has already indicated they need a great deal more than that. Now, a lot of defense investment is being done by the Danes and the Ests, but are the Ukrainians managing to scale up? Because we currently in the EU are not managing that. And in future, if there is to be a ceasefire in Ukraine, then Russia on the eastern flank will continue building up troops and will continue sabotage. So what is the future for Europe there?
Prima, and then colleagues, I have to conclude the list. I'm very sorry, but it's 5:30. Tobias.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here in the front. I think it was US President Teddy Roosevelt who once said that in a world of great power politics, you best speak softly and carry a big stick. I think we've done a lot of speaking softly, but especially when it comes to Europe, we sometimes have the impression that we don't have the big stick, especially if the Americans will stop doing the heavy lifting for us. So my question to you is, how can NATO contribute for Europe to actually acquire its own big stick in this world politics, and in particular, how to create a common market of defense, and there specifically the problem of the fact that currently we cannot apply the norms and standards from NATO because we don't have a NATO-EU coordination agreement, cooperation agreement that would actually allow us to get bang for the buck and have the stick that we need. And very briefly, a second question is, how can we push member states to actually deliver the weapons we already have, such as Patriot systems that we have in Europe, to Ukraine? Many have not delivered yet, some have, but many have not. And I would ask you, what do you do to achieve that? Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Secretary General, these were 25 questions and comments, and I now give you amazing 15 minutes to answer them all. The floor is yours, sir.
I'm not sure I can answer them all, but I'll do my best. So, to immediately delve into the questions and take them one by one, but then also clustering them a little bit. European architecture, how to avoid, when there are political differences, was a question. How to prevent disunity. I would say it is our strength that we have our political differences. And the fact that we have these political differences means that we are democracies with free press, with demonstrations on the street if necessary, with various parties forming governments. And I would say it is the strength of this organization, of NATO and also of the EU, that we are based on this principle of democracy. So I would respectfully disagree, and I think it is the unity which is stronger because of our diversity. Then on Greenland, there were many questions on Greenland, and basically what was discussed last week, and of course in the run-up to the debate, many phone calls have taken place, also from European leaders, but in the end what we agreed is, I think, two work streams going forward. One work stream is for NATO collectively to take more responsibility for the defense of the Arctic. As you know, there are 7 countries in the Arctic. There's the US through Alaska, and then of course Canada, Denmark because of Greenland, and then we have Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden. Yes, these are the 7 countries bordering on the Arctic. The 8th one is Russia, obviously not in NATO. So one work stream will be to see how best collectively we can prevent the Russians and the Chinese getting more access to the Arctic region, becoming also military, more of a adversary there, how to prevent that, also from them gaining access to the economy here and there, and that's one work stream. NATO clearly being in charge here. The second work stream is that what was agreed a week before I met with the President on Wednesday, there was the meeting in Washington between the foreign ministers of Denmark, and of course the Foreign Minister of Greenland with the Secretary of State of the US, Marco Rubio, and the Vice President, J.D. Vance. And they agreed to continue their discussions on in this trilateral setting. And basically what they probably will focus on, but now it is up to the Danes, Greenland and the US to do that. I will not be involved in that work stream. But clearly what came out of the meeting on Wednesday is at least 2 issues to address. And issue 1 is Russia, issue 2nd is China. How to prevent these 2 countries from gaining access in a military sense or in an economic sense to the Arctic. Of course, I have no mandate to negotiate the Foreign Minister of Denmark. For the previous Foreign Minister of Denmark asked that question. Of course, I have no mandate to negotiate on behalf of Denmark, so I didn't and I will not. Of course, that's up to Denmark to do. I will be very much involved as NATO Secretary General in the first work stream. How can we best, as NATO, collectively take the defense of the Arctic forward? And indeed, there is also an issue, I think, when the Arctic becomes more of an issue, and President Trump, by the way, and I will defend him now and then this afternoon just to irritate you, because I really feel that he deserves some defense. He was the one, during Trump 45, who already said there is an issue with Arctic security, and again he did so when he came back into office in January, and I think he's right. There is an issue with the Arctic region, there is an issue of collective security because these sea lanes are opening up. And because the Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. China, of course, not bordering on the Arctic, but as you know, very much being involved there together with the Russians. So clearly we have to address that, and that means that when it comes to this question of capabilities, we will see in NATO how we tackle this. We have a well-established process of capability targeting. So now we will look into, within the system of the capability targets, the Danes have made this point. Prime Minister Frederiksen visited me on Friday. She very much stressed that point rightly. I think others are stressing that point. So we now look into how we can best do that, taking that issue forward, that the capabilities we need also to defend the Arctic are also step by step becoming part of the overall capability targeting process. Then on the Ukraine peace agreement, obviously the security guarantees are extremely important. And as you know, there are 3 layers. One layer is the Ukrainian armed forces going forward. They will be the first line of defense. The second line of defense being the coalition of the willing. They providing training, providing, for example, also support in terms of the military build-up of the Ukrainian armed forces. So this is led by the French and the Brits, as you know. And of course, the US becoming more and more involved, as you know, since last summer. And as the president of Ukraine said yesterday, and I think he is right, these security guarantees are close to being agreed upon. But then, of course, there is the other issue, which is the rebuilding of Ukraine. And the third issue is the very sensitive issue of territory. In the end, it is only the Ukrainian government who can decide on territory. But for the Ukrainian government to get its head around what they can accept in terms of a compromise on territory, it is crucial for them to know that going forward, the Russians will not try to attack Ukraine again. Preferably, of course, they would love for Ukraine to be in NATO, but as you know, various NATO nations are at the moment blocking that. There is this irreversible path into NATO that will still be there, but at the short term, it's practically now not on the cards, and that means that the security guarantees are the more crucial to prevent the Russians from ever attacking again. No, there is no link between this. For the US side, one of you made that point that there was rumor of a link. I understand. I haven't heard it before. Between the Greenland discussion and the Ukrainian discussion, these are totally separate. The Shadow Fleet, rightly raised here, crucial because it is a big source of income for the Russian Federation. And I'm extremely happy with the fact that we pose more and more strategic dilemmas to the Russians in terms of Baltic Sentry, and we have seen what the Americans did with the Russian flagged ship close to Iceland, and we have seen many other interventions also by the French, close to the French coast. And I think when these ships pose a threat to the environment, when there are serious questions about the capability of the ship to continue sailing without cutting undersea infrastructure, critical undersea infrastructure, and obviously within all the legal frameworks, but of course all the nations are aware of that, within the legal framework there are ways to intervene, and that already is having an impact, and it forces the Russians to more and more protect the Shadow Fleet, which of course poses a cost on them. Then when it comes to the comments on soldiers in Afghanistan, the point I made with President Trump is that Article 5 was used once after 9/11. This was, of course, when the US was under attack, and I made the point that many non-US NATO countries, but also partners like Australia, have helped out in Afghanistan, and that for every 2 American soldiers who paid the ultimate price, 1 soldier of an ally or a partner, a NATO ally or a partner country, did not return home. And I particularly mentioned Denmark because, relatively speaking, they have had many casualties in Afghanistan, the Netherlands, but also, of course, bigger countries like Italy, UK, Australia, and others. And I know, and of course, the President already has made the point, I think it was yesterday, praising the United Kingdom for the immense sacrifice they made in shoulder to shoulder with the Americans fighting in Afghanistan. And I know that America greatly appreciates all the efforts being made in Afghanistan and acknowledges the fact that many casualties were there, not only Americans, but also from, as I said, allies and NATO partners. The European pillar, this whole discussion on the European pillar. I think let's focus. The focus should be that we complement each other, exactly as we're doing at the moment. And that is a NATO, as I said, standard setting, capabilities, command and control, and the EU, when it comes to resilience, when it comes to the industrial base, when it comes to regulation, when it comes to finding ways of getting the money to pay for our collective defense on top of what, of course, the individual nations are doing. That's how we should go forward. A European pillar is a bit of an empty word. I guess what you mean is a sort of, next to each nation, to have a sort of European defense force. I think, but of course that's up to the European countries to decide, but I think there will be a lot of duplication. I wish you luck if you want to do it, because you have to find the men and women in uniform. It will be on top of what is happening already, and it will make things more complicated. I think Putin will love it. So think again. But if the European pillar means what I just said, this division of labor, you are focusing on where Europe has strength and NATO focusing where NATO has strength, great. On my relationship with the President, hey, listen, if somebody is doing good stuff, and President Trump is doing a lot of good stuff, I believe. I know I'm irritating a lot of you again, but I think so. Because, as I said also in Davos, the 2% reached by all NATO countries now at the end of 2025 would never, ever, ever have happened without Trump. Do you really think that Spain and Italy and Belgium and Canada would have decided to move from 1.5 to 2%? Italy spending 10 billion more now on defense at the beginning of the year without President Trump? No way, it would not have happened. And do you really think that in The Hague we would have come to the 5% commitment without President Trump? No way. So I think he is very important to NATO. He is totally committed to NATO. He had one big irritant, one big pebble in the shoe, which is there since Eisenhower, the fact that the Europeans were not paying up. And with the NATO defense commitment in The Hague, the outcome of the Hague summit on spending and also on industrial production in Ukraine, but particularly here on spending, we are now equalizing with the US. So that irritant is gone. So there is a total commitment by the US to NATO in Article 5, but also an expectations that Europeans and Canadians will pay more. And we are doing so. Germany is a big example. You spent 70 billion on defense in 2021. You will spend 160 billion, 90 billion more in 2029. You will reach the 3.5% core defense spending as part of the 5% by 2029. This is Germany leading the way, the second biggest economy in NATO. This is crucial, and it is a great example to others. And of course, we have a couple of countries like Poland and Estland, Lithuania, and Latvia already on the 5%. But also Canada. Can I mention that here? Canada is back. Canada 2%, committing to the 5%, being a huge supporter for Ukraine, also spending a lot of money on these Pearl packages. So Canada is really back, and I think that's fantastic. Hey, but so when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him, and I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't. We can't. We need each other. And why do we need each other? I tell you. First of all, because also the US needs NATO. And the US is not only in NATO to prevent a mistake after the First World War, not to re-engage with Europe. And then again, the long arm of history reaching out to the US again in the Second World War, as Churchill famously said in his speech in 1941 in the US Congress. They are also in NATO because for the US to stay safe, and by the way, Arctic region is evidence here, they need a secure Arctic, they need a secure Euro-Atlantic, and they also need to secure Europe. So the US has every interest in NATO as much as Canada and the European NATO allies. But for Europe, if you really want to go it alone, and those who are pleading for that, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. You will lose then, in that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. So, hey, good luck. I love this. The Board of Peace. On the Board of Peace, I will not comment because when it comes to the Board of Peace, obviously NATO is not directly involved in the Middle East peace efforts. Of course, we welcome all the work to secure peace in Gaza, where allies are navigating the crisis, but we are not ourselves involved in that sense. Then bilateral alliances. Well, bilateral cooperation is great. I'm not sure about alliances, what is the difference, but I mean within NATO, there are many. I mean, we have the Weimar format, we have the E3, we have the E5, we have the A7, that's great, the B9. So there are many cooperation between countries within NATO which only strengthen NATO. I'm totally in favor. Then on Iran, we are only involved with Iran when it comes to the fact that Iran and North Korea and Russia and China are working together. But again, if it comes to the situation in Iran itself at the moment, and of course I'm extremely worried about that, we all are, it's not for NATO to get involved because NATO has its is concentrating on the Euro-Atlantic. The Russian threat, I think I have mentioned already. It's there, and that's why we have to really ramp up spending. And I also mentioned already this to the Renew questions, that I don't believe in this European pillar, except for if it means within that division of labor. Then, when it comes to the Taurus and other systems being delivered, yes or no to Ukraine, that's up to individual allies. I will not comment. Sorry, generally I'm saying if you deliver your systems, please no restrictions on them, so that Ukraine can really use them. But what is delivered, of course, is not for me to comment. I can only discreetly work behind the scenes. When it comes to the defense strategy, which was published last Friday, I think that is a good paper. There are no surprises in it. And what we really see is the US pivoting more towards Asia, but at the same time, absolutely with Europe, understanding that Europe will have to build up its own armed forces even further based on the The Hague Defense Investment Pledge. And that will mean over time that the US can do more in the Pacific, but there will always be a very strong conventional US presence in Europe, and obviously the nuclear umbrella will be there. I totally commend everything being done on military mobility. Here the EU plays a crucial role. When it comes to deregulation, military mobility, it is vital that a bridge not only can hold my Saab car, 20 years old, but also can hold a tank. Saab, yes, but it's a bit old now. The EU-NATO dialogue, I think, is better than it ever was. I mean, we work extremely well together. I'm really happy at all levels. I can only say I cannot see how that can improve, how the EU and NATO work. And we have to, so it's not just a... The Western Balkans security situation, of course, we constantly follow that. As you know, we can never accept a security vacuum to emerge in Bosnia. We will be constantly working on that. I'm in close contact with the Troika presidency there. Then, of course, when it comes to Kosovo, KFOR, crucial in Kosovo. And we also make sure that we keep the dialogue going with, it was your question, with Serbia. I have my own relationship with Alexander Vučić, the president. We know each other for many years. But of course, we also expect him to come up with accountability for what happened in a couple of years ago, and on two issues. And both of them he promised complete accountability. Then when it comes to Berlin Plus, I think I should not comment on hypothetical questions, but it is, I think, important to keep focus on reality that NATO-EU cooperation is stronger than ever. I really believe that at the moment. And that the US role in NATO, as I said, remains key, except for if you want to double your defense spending. But even then, I would not do it, because history brought us together. We have the same set of values. We belong to each other. The transatlantic relationship, I think, is crucial. Then on enlargement, of course, every country in the Euro-Atlantic area can apply for membership, but then we have to agree with 32. And on Ukraine, already mentioned, the unanimity is not there at the moment, but we will keep working with Ukraine to keep them as strong as possible and the irreversible path has been clearly laid out. Then we have all the lessons we need to capture from Ukraine. I totally agree, from the war. By the way, if Russia would attack NATO, probably that war will not be an exact copy of the war between Russia and Ukraine. But still, we have to capture all the lessons. That's why we have this Ukraine-NATO center now, joint initiative, JTEC in Poland, the Joint Analysis Training and Education Center, where we capture all the lessons from the war in Ukraine, also to learn from that in terms of NATO going forward. And then let me see, I think I've now, the Azores, I really have to work on that question. So I will not now freewheel, but maybe if we can get your address, I can give you an answer in writing. And then when it comes to Ingeborg, the question on when it comes to the Ukraine and scaling up the defense industrial production in Ukraine, that's really happening at the moment, but there is still a big potential untapped in Ukraine of about 10 to 15 billion, I think it is at the moment. At least these numbers are of 2-3 months ago, probably not changed a lot. So we can still do more there. This is also what the Danes and Lithuanians, they have led the way here with others. And that's why I'm saying when you speak about the 90 billion, the EU has now provided 60 billion of military support for 2 years. I think it is Europe 1, Ukraine 2, but then again, I'm afraid that you still need to spend money also, not afraid, I hope you still will spend money on other suppliers, but particularly when it comes to the interceptors and the defense of Ukraine. This is my final point here. And a couple of you made that point. As I said again, each night now, about 15 to 20 missiles are sent into Kiev, Lviv, Kharkiv, and other big population centers in Ukraine, and hundreds of drones. The interception rate has come down. And the interception rate has come down because some of the NASAMS systems now in Ukraine do not have enough interceptors to fight back. And also the Patriot systems, of course, need constant supply of PAC missiles for them to intercept these missiles. And I agree with the parliamentarian who said that you also have to dig into your own stockpiles. There are 2 ways to do that. One is these Pearl packages from the US, because big in that Pearl system is the interceptors for NASAMS and Patriot systems, but also what you have in your own national stockpiles. And I'm constantly working with your leaders. Please help me as parliamentarians to work with your leaders. You know which countries in this room, and I could discreetly inform you, but not in an open session, who are sitting on large piles of interceptors. The Supreme Allied Commander has said that he totally accepts that, that a lot of that stuff will now move into Ukraine, because that is now clearly the priority. So wherever you can help to put some pressure on your governments to do that, and some governments are already doing it. Norway announced it, Canada announced it, Turkey announced it, others have announced it. But there's still more to do, because this is the difference between life and death, day in, day out, but also how do we protect the crucial infrastructure, energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So please help there. I think I've almost answered all the questions, but not totally, because 1 or 2 I found too difficult. But the Azores question I will come back to in writing.
Dear Secretary General, dear Mark Rutte, thank you for being with us this afternoon. I thought that your reflection on European security, NATO's role on the strategic importance of the Arctic were extremely valuable, and hope to see you next year again. And the final word goes with Marie-Agnes.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's really important that we exchange ideas. And the EU is not a competition to NATO. NATO is the backbone of our security, but EU has to do their job and to strengthen EU power in NATO. We know it, bringing members together, explaining to the public how important our security is and that we can only achieve it by working together, and to expert pressure to our governments, you just said this, so that no one is allowed to stay out of it. And of course, we have to do our job, simplify the rules, less rules, it's really better, secure for all of us. And we have a lot to do, and we will continue, and thank you very much, looking forward to coming back.